According to the 2000 United Nations Development Report, Sudan is one of the world's poorest nations. But have you ever wondered what are the root causes for the allegedly never-ending cycle of violence and instability in Sudan? Can it ever shine through the darkness of violence and chaos? Is there any possibility that the Sudanese people will have a brighter future? In this video, we'll look at the challenges that Sudan is now experiencing. In Khartoum, the nation's capital, the White and Blue Niles merge to form the Nile River, which travels through Egypt on its way to the Mediterranean. From Darfur to Kassala, via the states of Blue Nile and Kordofan, Sudan is divided into a Sahelian strip with the desert in the far north, beautiful land in the Nile valleys and the Jazeera area, and land utilized for farming and raising animals across the rest of the country. But most people in the population struggle to survive in Sudan. Poor living circumstances were usually caused by harsh climatic conditions and political instability. Even though the nation has enormous mineral and agricultural potential, internal instability between the north and south of the country has made poverty worse. The nation's prolonged internal war over the majority of its independent existence has hindered its capacity to assume a leadership position in the area. This encompasses the hostilities in Darfur, South Kordofan, and Blue Nile, as well as two of the continent of Africa's longest-running civil wars. South Sudan split away from Sudan in 2011, becoming the 54th sovereign state in Africa, in accordance with the conditions of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement signed in 2005. Hundreds of people have been killed and injured in an outbreak of violence in Sudan that may be the beginning of a civil war. Since April 15th, the sound of airstrikes and close gunfire has awakened inhabitants of Khartoum, the capital of Sudan. More than 2,600 people have been injured, most of them civilians, in only the first 4 days of fight between the armies of two competing Sudanese generals. Men with guns have been breaking into and robbing houses. A resident whose home was shot at said, "It's like Call of Duty." Supplies of food, water, and medical care are beginning to run low. None of this is encouraging for Sudan's rocky but previously optimistic path to democracy. Civilians caught in the middle are currently attempting to evacuate Khartoum in search of safety in the countryside, since they are unable to see any light at the end of the tunnel. According to Ahmed Ismat, a protest organizer in Khartoum, "We don't support either side. Any war means the revolution is over." According to press reports, many people in several regions of the country, particularly in the south, are dying from sickness or famine. People who are relatively wealthy in Sudan reside in Khartoum, Port Sudan, and areas close to the Nile River, where circumstances are often better. Only a few people in the nation would be regarded as rich. 26.6% of the population is not anticipated to live past the age of 40, according to the Human Development Report 2000. Comparatively, the percentage is only 9.9% in Egypt and 7.7% in China. It is possible to link the violence and shortage of basic essentials to the early deaths of so many Sudanese. Approximately 27% of the people lack access to clean water, compared to 13% in Egypt, and 30% lack access to healthcare, compared to 1% in Egypt. And 34% of children under the age of 5 are underweight, compared to 12% in Egypt. According to the World Factbook, the GDP per capita at purchasing power parity was $1,000 in 2000. All of these figures highlight the hardship that the majority of Sudanese people experience. The fact that agriculture was ignored after the nation started producing oil is one of the issues. The Al Jazeera agricultural project, which formerly produced enormous amounts of cotton and other crops like sorghum and wheat, is currently ineffective, and the people who had lived on it are now starving. Multiple economic shocks resulted from South Sudan's separation, notably the loss of oil money, which had previously made up more than half of the government of Sudan's income and 95% of its exports. As a result, there has been slower economic development and double-digit consumer price inflation, which, together with rising gasoline costs, led to violent demonstrations in September 2013. Although Sudan started exporting crude oil in the last quarter of 1999, the Ministry of Social Welfare reported on Tuesday, November 10, 2009, that 25% of the population received social assistance, zakat. The most recent data indicates that Sudan exports about 500,000 barrels per day. However, according to international standards, 40% of Sudan's population lives in poverty. The minimal income required to maintain a sufficient standard of living in a particular nation is known as the poverty threshold or poverty line. The official or general understanding of the poverty line is significantly higher in rich nations than in developing ones in practice, just like the concept of poverty. numerous individuals have left their homes and become refugees as a direct result of recent tribal fighting in some regions, such as Jonglei. There are a lot of refugees and internally displaced people as a result of the frequent violence, especially from the earlier fighting that caused South Sudan to secede. Sudan is currently a source, destination, and transit country for unauthorized migration, including refugees and those seeking asylum traveling from East Africa to the north through Libya on their way to Europe. There are an estimated 800,000 South Sudanese refugees living in the nation, along with 330,000 refugees and asylum seekers from Yemen, Eritrea, Syria, Ethiopia, Khartoum, and Ethiopia. In 2010, food shortages affected more than 1 million people in southern Sudan, as the United Nations Children's Fund (UNICEF) predicted. Hilda Johnson, Deputy Executive Director of UNICEF, described the food situation in southern Sudan as dire in an interview. In southern Sudan's Jonglei state, Ms. Johnson brought up an alert over the rising number of malnourished youngsters. The World Food Programme of the United Nations, or WFP, has verified that food airdrops have begun to feed more than 50,000 people in southern Sudan's remote, off-road locations. Aldo Spaini, the WFP's Deputy Logistics Coordinator, reported that the agency has already delivered more than 600 metric tons of food to 3 states. 3 southern Sudanese states, Jonglei, Upper Nile and Warrap, received 4,000 metric tons of food by airdrop starting on Thursday, November 5, 2009, according to the WFP. Mass protests that began in December 2018 and ended in Omar al-Bashir's removal from office in April 2019 were sparked by ongoing increases in food prices and long-standing complaints after more than 30 years of control. As a result, a transitional government was established in September 2019 and began implementing comprehensive economic and social reforms, as well as holding peace talks with armed groups to resolve conflicts and grievances across the nation. As a result, almost all armed opposition parties signed the Juba Peace Agreement in October 2020. A military coup occurred in October 2021, a year after that. Important governmental entities were abolished, and the 2019 constitutional charter's provisions were suspended. The Prime Minister resigned in early January 2022 after his attempts to secure a political agreement with domestic parties fell down. A political framework agreement, PFA, was struck in December 2022 between the military and a number of political groups in an effort to restart the nation's 2-year transition to civilian rule. In January 2023, a second phase of the political process was initiated with the goal of achieving agreement on critical topics and encouraging non-signatories to participate. At the conclusion of this phase, an agreement was to be signed, ushering in a new phase of transition. Sudan, like the rest of the globe, was severely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic's social and economic effects. Additionally, it was impacted by historic floods in 2020 and 2022, which caused damage estimated to be in the billions of dollars. This conflict is just one of many being fought around the world, from Ethiopia to Myanmar to the Democratic Republic of Congo. Wars are becoming more and more common. In the middle of the 1980s, the average ongoing conflict lasted for about 13 years. By 2021, that number had risen to almost 20. One factor is the deterioration of international norms. For example, when Russia invaded Ukraine, it flagrantly violated the UN Charter. In Sudan, few people have been held accountable for the mass murder and physical abuse of civilians during the country's various wars. Conflicts, famine, flooding, sickness, and illiteracy are some of the things that make people poor. Observers think Sudan will remain a poor country for some time to come, unless a long-term solution to wars, containment of illness, and elimination or reduction of illiteracy are discovered. With that said, thank you for watching. See you in the next video. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more. And if you found this content helpful, give the video a like.